Intro music with sounds of clashing swords, and waves the Roman legionary, disciplined, relentless, the master of the ancient battlefield. On land, they were unstoppable. But at sea, well, that was a very different story. In the 3rd century BC, Rome was a republic of farmers and soldiers, a land power through and through. While they weren't complete strangers to the water, they had no real naval tradition to speak of. Their great rival, Carthage, was the exact opposite, an empire of sailors and merchants, heirs to the legendary seafaring Phoenicians. So when these two superpowers finally went to war, it should have been a slaughter at sea. But the Romans had a plan. They weren't going to try to outsail the masters of the ocean. They were going to cheat. This is the story of how Rome used brutal, game-breaking inventions to turn the sea into just another Roman battlefield. Subscribe and share. Now continue. Section 1. The underdogs of the sea. To really get how wild Rome's naval strategy was, you have to understand just how outclassed they were. For generations, the Carthaginians had been the dominant naval force in the western Mediterranean. Their sailors were seasoned veterans, their warships were top of the line, and their tactics was second nature. They could dance circles around their enemies, ramming and sinking ships with terrifying skill. Rome, on the other hand, was playing catch-up. Their soldiers were the best on earth, sure, but most were landlubbers who were more likely to get seasick than win a naval battle. The established rules of naval combat, all about speed, ramming and maneuverability, was a game the Romans were almost guaranteed to lose. Things came to a head in 264 BC when the First Punic War kicked off. The fight was for control of Sicily, a vital island neither power could afford to let go. Suddenly, Rome was forced to fight on the water against an enemy that lived there. It was a massive strategic problem. Without a real navy, they couldn't protect their coasts, supply their armies, or challenge Carthage's maritime empire. The odds were not in their favor. So what do you do when you can't win the game? You flip the whole table. Section 2. If you can't outsail them, outfight them. The Romans got their break thanks to a bit of luck and a whole lot of ingenuity. As the story goes, a Carthaginian quinquerem, the most advanced warship of the day, was captured. In a massive feat of reverse engineering, the Romans used this and other captured ships as a blueprint to build their own fleet, churning out over 100 vessels in a shockingly short time. But copies of ships weren't enough. They still didn't have the expert sailors to crew them. Early on, Roman rowers were so green they supposedly trained on wooden benches built on the beach, just to learn the motions. They knew that in a traditional naval battle, they'd still be at the bottom of the sea. They needed a way to cancel out Carthage's skill and play to their own strength, their unstoppable infantry. The solution was one of the most brilliant and brutal inventions in naval history, the Corvus. Latin for crow, the Corvus was a terrifyingly simple idea. It was a heavy boarding bridge, roughly 11 meters long, mounted on the bow of a Roman ship. At the end of it was a huge, sharp iron spike, the beak. When an enemy ship got close enough, the Romans would swing the bridge over and let it drop. That heavy spike would slam into the enemy's deck, locking the two ships together. In that single moment, the naval battle was over. A land battle had just begun. The Corvus was a dirty trick that completely shattered the rules of naval warfare. Suddenly, Carthage's superior speed and maneuverability meant nothing. Their ships were pinned, unable to ram or run. They were trapped, forced into the one fight they wanted to avoid, a deck-to-deck brawl with Roman legionaries. The Romans would storm across the bridge, and the Carthaginian ship, crewed by sailors, not soldiers, would become a floating slaughterhouse. The Romans had turned a sea fight into a land fight, a fight they knew they could win. Section 3. The proof is in the victory. This new superweapon made its grand debut at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. The Carthaginian commander, Hannibal's goal was apparently so confident in his navy's superiority that his fleet approached the Romans in a disorganized fashion, expecting a quick and easy win. He was in for a nasty surprise. As his ships closed in, the Romans dropped the Corvus for the first time. You can just imagine the confusion on the Carthaginian decks as these strange, giant claws slammed down, trapping them. The first ships in the Carthaginian line were captured almost immediately. Their skilled sailors were no match for armored legionaries in close-quarters combat and were simply overwhelmed. Panic tore through the Carthaginian fleet. Their trusted tactics were useless. Their fast, agile ships had become death traps. They tried to maneuver around the Romans to avoid the dreaded beak, but it was too late. By the end of the day, Rome had won its first major naval victory, and the Corvus was a proven success. It had leveled the playing field in a single, brutal stroke. Section 4, the price of a dirty trick. That the Corvus was a hack, and it had a serious flaw. The massive bridge made the Roman ships top-heavy and dangerously unstable, especially in bad weather. This design flaw had catastrophic consequences. In 255 and 253 BC, two entire Roman fleets were wrecked by storms. Hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men were lost to the sea, in part because their own secret weapon made their vessels less seaworthy. The Romans weren't just a one-trick pony, either. The Corvus was part of a larger strategy: turn every battle into an ugly, overwhelming brawl. Their ships carried a large force of marines, perhaps around 120, specifically for boarding actions. They built towers on their decks for archers and, as naval technology developed, even mounted artillery like ballistae to fire bolts and stones, hoping to shred the enemy before they even got close. Eventually, though, the Romans learned their lesson. The Corvus was a crutch. As the war dragged on, Roman sailors finally got the experience they needed. They became better seamen. By the end of the First Punic War, the Corvus appears to have been abandoned. They didn't need their training wheels anymore. Rome had become a genuine naval power. In later wars, centuries later, they would develop even more refined boarding tech. The harpax, for example, was a catapult-fired grappling hook invented by Agrippa during the civil wars of the late 1st century BC. It was a more elegant solution from a much later era, showing just how far Rome had come from the crude, but effective Corvus. Rome's transformation from a landlocked power to the master of the seas is one of the greatest military pivots in all of history. They started out as the underdogs, facing an enemy that had ruled the waves for centuries. But through raw determination, ingenuity, and a willingness to break the rules, they completely changed the nature of naval combat. The Corvus was a weapon born of desperation, a brutal answer to what seemed like an impossible problem. It was the key that unlocked the Mediterranean, allowing Rome to finally defeat Carthage and project its power across the known world. The sea, once a terrifying barrier, was on its way to becoming their nostrum, our sea. A Roman lake. It just goes to show that sometimes, victory isn't about playing the game better than your opponent. It's about being bold enough to invent a whole new game, with your own deadly rules. What do you think was Rome's most effective dirty trick? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about the epic conflicts of the ancient world, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell.